Welcome to Author's Tales, where we go beyond the words and into the heart of the storyteller.
Every book holds a story, but beyond the pages lies something even greater: the journey. The long nights, the countless rewrites, the moment when doubt whispers and passion shouts back louder. This is where authors share their truth, the struggles, the breakthroughs, and the moments that made them believe in their story.
If you love a great story or dream of writing your own, you're in the right place.
Because every book has a voice, every author has a tale, and the best stories, they don't just get told, they get lived.
This is Author's Tales, where stories come to life.
Good morning, Eric. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Exceptional. Every day getting a little better.
It's earlier for me than it is for you, so it is actually a very good morning, I guess. I'm not the best morning person, but I'm trying.
I hear you. I hear you. So today we're going to be talking about your book, Exciting Times. Wow, what a great book. And I do have it here, right? I've been reading it. The Power of Personality. Oof. Deep. We're going to go deep into your book. Tell us what one of the most important things that you would like for people to, once they pick up your book, what is it about your book that is going to, that they're going to talk about?
I think my book's pretty fun. First of all, I think it's about finding yourself and finding out about the other people, the people around you, obviously from the title, right? But overall, it's about learning that the whole idea of life is the process of understanding people better versus compartmentalizing. I know a lot of times it's a personality typing book, and I think a lot of times people think of those as putting people into categories. But my book is more about telling stories to help people understand get a deeper meaning from people versus putting people into boxes.
Yeah. So here's what we have going on right there. So how can personality typing help them make better life choices, relationships, work? When we talk about relationships, I mean, that can get a little sticky sometimes, right?
Yeah, I think the thing that I guess I would say differ, or how my book differs from maybe other personality typing books, is it really places an emphasis on our value system and understanding that the value system of each person and each individual is different, right? I think sometimes we assume superficial differences and we accept those, but we're not particularly quick to accept the major differences. Like this person values family versus this person values work, right? I think we're always taught the work-life balance, but I think in general, when we prioritize one thing over another, there's no such thing as balance. So I think the book is about accepting that versus trying to change other people, because I think when other people value different things, we just think that they're wrong, right? And the book is about understanding that they're not wrong, they're just different. And the more you understand that, the better you'll get along.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know it's earlier for you. We're 3 hours apart. I'm in New York. You're in LA. When you think about people and personalities, does environment make a difference?
Yeah, I think a lot of times that's the big, I guess I was disagreement, but I guess the big conflict, right? People are like, well, your experience makes you who you are, right? Versus any preset notion or determination. I think it's a combination of that, and those two things make us who we are, right? So it's our experience versus our personality type. And I know a lot of times people ask, when can you figure out someone's personality type? When is it ingrained? And I'm always more I don't know, just it doesn't really matter. Some people, it's easier to tell early on. Sometimes it takes a little longer. But at the end of the day, our personality type is what it is. And then our environment, what it does is it kind of molds who we are. Meaning I always say you always use Tim Duncan as an example, even though maybe some people don't know who he is anymore. He's a great NBA Hall of Fame basketball player. And he didn't start playing basketball until I believe high school. And but it didn't mean that it wasn't always in him, right? I think he was a swimmer because I think he came from the Virgin Islands. But once he started playing basketball, he picked it up right away. And that's what I found with my teaching is that once you find someone's personality type, it's great because you might tell them things that they never heard before, but you'll see them immediately click, and I think that's the key is that we got to figure out who we are, and then our environment does determine that a little bit, but at the end of the day, our personality type is probably the strongest determinant of what we are.
Do our personality types, can they fluctuate based on who we're in front of, what we're doing, based on even if we travel to a different country, right? Because we may be experiencing a whole different way of people even thinking or acting.
The funny thing is some personality types do that naturally, right? They figure out what the other person wants to hear, what's the right thing in their particular environment, and they really do live by that philosophy of win in Rome, right? Do what the Romans do. While
Right.
others are a lot more ingrained. Like you think when people travel, some people like to fully immerse themselves in the culture and try different things and like become different people.
Right.
I mean that and put that in quotes. And others just go to the same places that they would, if they were living at home. They go to if they went to a bar every day after work, in America, then they'll go to France or Paris and then look for bars, right?
Right. Right.
Because they have that very secure, like this is what I like, and I think none of those are wrong. But I do think that when we travel, it's actually less of travel doesn't make us change as much as it's actually a great indicator of who we are based on how we travel.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm one of those people that when I travel, I want to eat what the locals are eating.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to go to the tourist places, because they're going to try to fill the needs and desires of who they think they want there. The people that are going to spend more money. But and it's not even for me about the money. For me, it's about the experience because they want to give me the same experience I had when I'm home. I don't want that.
Right.
Right?
Right. And that's probably based on your personality, right? Like what you value, right? Like
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
the ability to like bring in all these different cultural experiences that maybe shape your identity, right? Versus other people would be like, no, I want to be at the Four Seasons. Okay. Like I want to like get a massage, and then go to the hotel restaurant or the restaurant that's closest, which is probably great. It's like a Michelin star or whatever.
Right.
But everyone for each their own, right? Or to each their own.
Don't get me wrong, I do like Four Seasons. I'd rather sleep in that than a hut, but sometimes you get a better experience or a different experience if you do hang out with the locals. One of the things that whenever I go to a different country, I always go out into the neighborhood, right?
Mm,
I may stay at a fancy hotel because I do enjoy that as well. But then I want to go and what do the locals eat? What are their culture like? Because I want to explore. And am I different than people who just want to spend the time at the hotel and eat at that 5-star restaurant? Then maybe something that has no stars because people don't go to it, right?
Yeah, like in the book, I split people up into 4 different personality packs.
Mhm.
And I call them packs because once you're in a personality pack, there are 4 other different personalities within that pack that are animal types, right?
Mm.
So 4 times 4 is 16 different personalities. But each of those main 4 personality packs value something, has a different core value. So I'd say about half the population values safety and security most of all. So I think that would be the type who would prefer to stay in the hotel or at least close to the hotel, like one that is very established. Because when you prioritize safety and security, you're going to do what is known and what's certain, right? So it doesn't mean that they won't get out of the hotel. Especially they will travel, but they're the most likely to have a very set plan, have a specific like a book that they're looking at that says, okay, these are the things that I'm going to checklist. Like if I'm in Paris, I obviously got to hit the Eiffel Tower. I got to go to the Louvre, and whatever city they're in, right? But you don't seem like you have that type of personality. You have a personality that seems like it would seek like kind of identity, self-identity, and that's one of the other personality packs. And I think in general, that's a very different experience or different living experience, and definitely a different travel experience.
Right. Yeah. No, for sure. We put anybody who's interested in getting the book, we put the QR code up there. All you have to do is take your phone, scan it, because for me, reading this book definitely talks about the different personality types. And you talked about the 4 personality packs, right? And we're going to put that across here so everybody can take a quick look. Talk to us about the gatherers, the hunters, the shamans, the smiths. What differentiates them? And do they ever take, maybe a person can become a gatherer who maybe they were a shaman or maybe they were a hunter? Do they interchange?
Hmm. You know, oftentimes people ask, can people change, right? And I know the nice answer always says, yes, people can always change, because I think that makes people feel good. However, I always say that people cannot change. I think we grow, and I think we can grow into better versions of ourselves or worse versions of ourselves. I think the danger of saying that people can change, it really just, especially from the person who wants people to change, it really just means that they want that person to change into them, right? Like they're like, oh no, but you can. It's like the parents who tell their kids, like when their kids like, I don't know if I want to have kids, and the parents like, oh, don't worry, you'll grow into it. It's like,
Yeah.
you know, some people might not, you know, like just because you value something a lot doesn't mean the next person, and especially doesn't mean your kids will. So I don't think people change. I think if we actually do legitimately change, it actually is more us finding out more about ourselves, right? And I think that's also something where if you're told by your parents, oh, this is what you got to do, this is what you got to do, and you live like maybe the first 20 years of your life like that, and then you realize, you know what, that's not really what I want to do. You haven't changed, right? You've just maybe discovered more of yourself, right? Who you truly are. So I would say gatherers make about half the population. They are like what we think of as like traditional values, like traditional family values. Like this is how it is. You want to, you know, work hard, do well in school, like go to college, go to good college, get a good job after, raise a family, buy a house, get a car, you know, all the things that we hear and see in the commercials. So that makes about half the population. But then there's about a third of the population, the hunters, which I see you have down on that screen right there.
Right.
They make about a third, and they just want to have fun, you know? And I know a lot of times people think, oh, fun, that sounds so superficial versus like this other thing. And it's like, no, what I mean is by fun, they want to experience every physical thing that they can in life. Any visceral sensation they want, you know, whether it's eating everything, drinking everything, tasting everything, like seeing the sights, listening to great music. That is their core value. And you can see how when someone wants that versus someone wanting safety and security, well, those two things can conflict.
Right. And let's talk about the shamans. What makes them stand out, even from gatherers?
Well, shamans, you can definitely tell from gatherers, because shamans are the ones who are always like, oh my God, am I doing the right thing? I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. You know, gatherers are generally pretty certain that they're doing the right thing just because they've gotten that positive reinforcement growing up and going to school. Like they're the kids who are going to like, you know, listen to the teacher. So they're always going to get that reinforcement. So they'll always know, or at least feel like they know. Versus a shaman seeks self-knowledge. So when you seek self-knowledge, you're always wondering whether you are who you are, right? Whether you are becoming who you're meant to be. And the problem with that is, you know, when they're told gather traits, like when they're told, no, you need to focus on this versus this, that can cause them to become quite insecure. And so thus they're constantly questioning what they're doing. Now, the benefit of that is when they be like, they don't really have a midlife crisis. I always say shamans don't have a midlife crisis. Their whole life is a midlife crisis. The beauty of that is when you become 40 and you're middle age, you're not going to have that like crisis where you're like, oh my God, I can't believe I've been doing a job for the last 20 years that I hate. Because for the most part, shamans will put in that work very early. So they're the most likely adult which you'll meet where they'll be like, oh, okay, like they're the most likely person to say, I don't know if I've found out what I want. I don't know if I'll ever find out what I want, but I'll keep searching. So, yeah, that's a shaman type in a nutshell, in a very small nutshell.
Yeah. One of the things that when people ask me about, you know, I do so many different things, and I go, yeah, but when I grow up, I'll get a job, I promise. Because I love what I do. Right. And I know that there's a lot of people out there who are still searching for that passion, that something that drives them, or like you said, they're following someone else's plan, right? Their parents' plan. Talk about the Smiths. Well, I think Smiths. I'm thinking somebody who's hitting a hammer to making horseshoes. You know, that's what I'm thinking about. Tell me about that.
Yeah, and that's kind of exactly what the Smiths do. Now, it's a little trickier, right? Because I think when I use the term smiths, and hunters actually use a lot of tools. So I think when you think of a smith, you think of them using a tool. But the difference with my like metaphorical smith is smiths basically create tools of efficiency, right? So nowadays we wouldn't be well, we would be making horseshoes, but very far more or less of them for sure. I think the technology that we create now, that is the tool of efficiency, right? So when you think of a smith, they're always trying to create systems that work in tandem with each other to make life easier, because their natural instinct is to go towards, if like gatherers seek safety and security, hunters seek excitement, shamans seek self-knowledge, smiths seek information. Number one. What they do with that information determines which smith they are. Obviously, I told you that there are 4 animal personality types within each group. But smiths overall seek information so that they can create these things like, windows, or like Elon Musk would be an example of a smith. I know he's not the best name to drop right now, but people who invent things that change the world, basically.
So Benjamin Franklin.
The funny thing is, you mentioned Franklin and Musk, and let's say Steve Jobs are probably the same animal type. So they're the same personality type. They're all smiths, but they're the same personality type within smiths. So not every smith, I shouldn't have said they invent things, because they don't all invent things,
Right.
but they're all seeking information. And what they do with that information determines what smith they are.
Interesting. Can a parent tell, once they get your concepts and ideas, can they tell the difference if they have like 4 or 5 kids? Can they tell the difference in their kids?
Yeah, well, the first thing is they got to figure out who they are, right? And once they figure out who they are, then they'll definitely go like, oh, no wonder why this kid pisses me off so much. Because then they'll start seeing like, okay, like I clearly can see the kids that are more like you and maybe more like your spouse, right? And sometimes they won't ever, maybe they might not be like either. And that's okay too. I think sometimes people are like, well, they're not like me, so they must be like the other person. But once again, I'm not a big fan of believing that our environment totally makes us. It shapes us, but it doesn't make us, because I think some parents will agree that they don't have any kids that are like their spouse or themselves. But it's generally pretty easy to identify. I think sometimes, I mentioned the shaman. Sometimes if you get a shaman with 2 parents that are like, let's say, gatherers, or very like certain about who they are, I think sometimes it gets a little harder, because that shaman might try to assimilate and kind of hide who they are, because especially when they're young, they don't really know who they are, right? So they might kind of like just try to be like everyone else, and that might be a little difficult. But other types, especially like if you're a gather parent and you have a hunter child, I think it's really easy to see, because you're just like, I don't understand why my hunter child just keeps running around, and they don't always listen to me, and they're always trying to have fun, and trying to do what they want when I'm trying to tell them to follow the rules. I think that's like probably the easiest one to do.
Follow the rules or else, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
So,
when you have I was going to say, when I used to teach my teachers this, because I used to own an education company. When you're a gatherer, and especially a gather parent, your natural instinct and you have a hunter child is to say, hey, if you eat those cookies in that cookie jar, I'm going to slap your hand. And the funny thing with a hunter is they'll be like, is that cookie in the jar worth me getting my hand slapped? And a gatherer just be like, no, that's not the point. The point is I'm telling you to do that because I'm your parent, so you should just listen to me. But a hunter will just calculate whether the pleasure is worth the pain. And that's not a bad thing. Like when you think of people who do that throughout their whole lives, they're just constantly making that quick calculation of, is the risk worth it? And if the risk is worth it and the punishment is worth it, they do it.
Wow, this is so insightful, Eric. I appreciate you, writing the book and taking the time, and because the ideas are so powerful. Let me ask you: can 2 types unite, like 2 shamans? Can 2 gatherers get married or have a relationship? And how does that fall into how they understand one another?
Yeah, like a lot of types will assume, oh, then I should find someone like me. And you might think also, I'd mentioned that gatherers seek safety and security. Families are really important to them, or the idea of family is really important to them, building a family, because of course a family does make you feel more secure, right?
Right.
So you think that 2 gatherers, like a gather coupling, would be the most common because they value that and they make up half the population. But the funny thing is, the most common coupling is a gather and a hunter. Hunters make up about a third. gatherers would make about a half. That's about 85% of the population, but hunters don't always, family's not always first and foremost on their mind, especially like when they're in their 20s. They're not really thinking about that. They're really thinking about like, okay, let's go to like places like Cabo and just like Ibiza and just have fun, you know?
Yeah.
So it's funny that they're the natural coupling, but that shows us that instinctively, I think what we do is we appreciate that the people that are different than us are probably a lot more fun to be around for a
Mhm.
long amount of time. Like if you're with someone who is exactly like you, I think that can get a little territorial. It can get a bit worrisome, because like you start like realizing like there's no like nothing to compliment you, right?
Mhm.
And so I think if you two gathers are together, and that's the second most common coupling. So I'm not saying that never happens. That
Right.
happens quite a bit. But I think when you both value safety and security, it might seem maybe a little, I don't want to say boring, but maybe it's a little boring. That's the type of relationship that might get a little boring sometimes because you don't have anyone like kind of going around the edges and trying to really push the envelope. Where if you have a gatherer and a hunter, then you get that pairing, and you get that kind of energy.
So you're saying opposites attract is a good thing.
Yeah, I guess that was my very long-winded way of saying that opposites attract. But I will say though that like gatherers and hunters both speak in a concrete way and they understand the world concretely. So that would probably be the biggest difference between the two more plentiful types, gatherers and hunters over here, and you'll have smiths and shamans over here, because smiths and shamans speak in a more abstract sense, right? They tend to love ideas. They love talking about their feelings. I mean, I guess everyone likes to talk about their feelings, but they tend to talk about it in an abstract way, right? They're not going to be like, oh, you know what happened to me today? This is what happened to me today, and that's why I feel this way. Like they're not really talking about specific like things that happen in, I guess, the quote unquote real world. They tend to talk about what it means. And I think that's why you'll find that that's a very common pairing too. Even though shamans and smiths combined make about 15% of the population, you'll often see them as couples. Or at the very least, you'll often see them as second marriages, like where, let's say the shaman and the smith have married a gatherer because they're the most common type. And then they realize, oh yeah, we don't speak on the same level. We're totally like, yeah, we're speaking different languages. And so thus they will get divorced and then they'll find someone else, especially generally when they find someone who's an abstract speaker, they'll be like, wow, this is exactly what I'm looking for. So that's a really common second pairing.
Interesting. So let's get into the animal types, because you're talking to us about that there's 4 animal types, right?
4 animal types within each path, yes.
Right. And what makes them different, right?
So we could take the gatherers. So we have the stags, the beavers, the elephants, and the bears. And you could split those two up. I'm using visuals here in my on video. You can split those,
them.
yeah, you can split those two up from how they seek out safety and security, right? I know I've been saying that a lot, safety and security. But what are the things that give us that feeling, right? I think for stags and beavers, that idea of duty and following their duty gives them that. So like you'll find, people who follow the rules, this is the way that things should be done. And it just makes them feel like they are doing the right thing. Elephants and bears, on the other hand, they get that feeling of safety and security by prioritizing family. And so all 4 animal types within the gatherer pack are going to value both those things, doing what you should do and also raising a family, but they will prioritize them differently. The example I always give is if you have go to a parent-teacher conference and the teacher is just railing on a kid and just saying, oh, they've been doing terrible, they're not following the rules, they are totally misbehaving. If you have a stag and a beaver parent, they will almost always side with the teacher. 100%. They'll be like, oh, you know what? I'm going to take my kid home and I'm going to teach them a lesson. Like,
no.
Yeah, you don't, and they can be kind of scary, right? Like, but in their mind, it's not that they don't love their kid. It's just that they're like, well, I love my kid, but I also realize that my job and my duty as a parent is to make sure that they become a fine, upstanding citizen. So I am not going to let this happen. Versus the elephants and the bears on one side, it's not like they'll side with their kid particularly, but they might be like, oh, well, it's my fault because I've been coming home from work late, and they might like fall on a sword for their kid. And that's like generally a good way to determine the two.
Right. Let's take some celebrities and let's find out what kind of and you already talked about Elon Musk. some celebrities out there who either have been or are current. Let's look at Madonna. Let's look at Cher, right? People with one name. um, let's look at Prince. How about those three people?
Well, you picked performers, so it's gonna seem like when I say this, people are like, "Oh my God, they're all hunters." But yeah, those are all hunters. And I'm
Mm,
not saying that musicians and actors and any kind of performer are always going to be hunters, but you can kind of see it with those three types that, obviously when you seek out visceral excitement, you're also going to seek out ways to give that to other people, right?
mm,
Hunters generally find a craft that they love in their life and really work on developing that craft. Now, we can take Madonna and Prince, for example, and Cher. Funny enough, they're all three of them are probably different animal types within the hunters.
right.
Like I think of Prince as what we call a butterfly. So that's a personality type within the hunter pack. And butterflies are really good at going away in their own little, like a cocoon. They go into their studio or they go into their office or they go into their workshop or whatever that is. And then they craft this like work of art for all of us to see and they bring it out. Kind of like a butterfly, right? Where they go in all ugly like a caterpillar and then they work on it and then come out of the cocoon and ta-da, like yeah, and so that's kind of like what artists do, right? So I
Yeah.
think of Prince as being very specific to that, right? He's known for his songwriting. Obviously, he can play like 100 different instruments.
Mhm.
So hunters are really involved in developing their craft. So Madonna, on the other hand, so people might ask, well, what's her craft aside from singing? She is a fox, and foxes are the best at marketing and taking what they think the person outside of them wants to hear and changing what they have to give and modifying it based on that. I just think of Madonna as like one of those people who's constantly changing her act to try to like, give a different kind of, I don't want to say marketing because that kind of like makes it seem lesser,
Right.
but she's one of the great marketers
She's
of the
brilliant.
80s and 90s,
She's
right? Yeah,
yeah.
like anyone going from like one thing, the Marilyn Monroe to the where she went to I guess like I don't say anti-Catholic, but kind of like the express yourself era.
Right.
Yeah, it's all about changing to modify based on what's in.
Right. Right. And so look at the couple that is all over the media, Taylor Swift and Kelsey, right? Talk to us about their animal types and what are they as
Gosh,
far as shamans, gatherers, hunters?
I keep saying hunters, but they seem like hunters to me. Kelsey, especially, not to say that I don't know anything about Taylor Swift. She's
All
probably
right.
the more famous of the two, but I probably know more about the NFL. But Travis Kelsey would probably be a peacock, and a peacock is once again one of the hunters, and they're just they just love to move. And obviously, he's a football player, but specifically, he plays the tight end, and which is kind of like a bigger receiver position. And receivers and tight ends tend to be peacocks quite a bit because peacocks have the best body control, like actual physical body control. That is one of their strengths. So that's which is why they love to dance. They love to be like the life of the party. I also think of like Jack Black. Jack Black's a total peacock. They're just very like loud and fun, and they have a lot of energy. I think Taylor Swift is probably in that, but she's probably a butterfly. So just like Prince, she's known for her songwriting as well. She's also a performer. She has a great sense of style. She kind of probably just goes into wherever zone or area she likes to go into, write her songs, and come out with, an album. So
Right.
I'd say like those hunter couplings are going to have a lot of fun. Now, staying together for the long haul sometimes can be a problem. Like I always think of like the Fitzgeralds or something where, they're just going to burn hot and fast.
Right.
But that's not every single hunter coupling. But as anyone who follows, which I do not, but if you just watch TMZ or follow like showbiz and showbiz couples, you'll see that, they tend to burn hot and fast.
Yeah, hard and then they're gone.
And then they're gone.
Next week. And then the next week.
Right. And then that's kind of how hunters are, where they're just like, oh, I just like, like, oh, that was really fun. Okay, let's move on to the next. But a gatherer might see that and just be horrified, right? Because they're like, what are you doing? You're not even like establishing anything. You're going to end up like 50 and alone. And, then the hunter might say like, well, number one, I'll never end up alone. I'll always be with someone.
Right.
Now, is that someone going to be the same person that I was with 10 years ago? Maybe not.
Right.
They might answer in that fashion. So
think about somebody like Jay Leno, who was on the Tonight Show, or even Johnny Carson, right? And then now look at who's on the Tonight Show now. Right.
Jimmy Fallon.
Yeah, Jimmy Fallon, and he's phenomenal. But you don't see them. Jay Leno maybe a little bit. You don't see them outside of their performance area like some of these other celebrities. Talk to us about those type of people.
Yeah, talk show hosts are really interesting, right? Because you might think that they are going to be hunters as well because they're performing and adjusting and telling jokes. But I can say a couple examples within the talk show or former talk show circuit, and then you can see like the difference in their personality. So Jay Leno is a hunter. He's probably a fox, so he's the master of like the quip. Like you give me something, then I'll give you something. Like that's what foxes do, right? And he's so quick with it. You take someone like Fallon. Fallon isn't really known for like being like as witty as Leno, right? He's definitely not known for being that craftsman where Leno's like he's probably still doing stand-up, like at his age. Fallon is more of like, hey, I'm your buddy. Like, let's all get together and have this really fun, safe space where we can tell jokes that are not particularly subversive. They're just kind of things that everyone can laugh at and feel good about. So in a way, he's like an elephant. So that's one of the gatherer types. So it's interesting to see that we have like the gatherer and hunters, both gatherers and hunters as talk show host examples, because, everyone can bring their own strengths to whatever they're doing. Like, I hate when some personality test will say like, oh, you are this type, so you should be doing this job. Because people might think, oh, so only these type of people can do this job. And then they end up hating it, right? The idea of personality typing, because they're like, clearly I can do this job because I'm doing it for a while. But it's cool to know that personality types can help us bring something to each individual job and different things. So Letterman would be an example of a shaman type. Like, and he's a lot more subversive with his jokes. He's not as like, he's quick, but he's not like Leno where he's like throwing zingers out there. But with Letterman, it's definitely more of like his personality is always about questioning and kind of like making fun of the status quo. And when you make fun of the status quo, you often do things that are a bit scary and make people feel a little unsafe. So we can definitely see he's not a gatherer. He's clearly a shaman trying to like turn over the apple cart.
Yeah. So how do we determine who we are based on everything you've been telling us so far? Because you gave me the type I am and the animal. Would you share? Do you still feel that way?
Yeah, you haven't shown anything to the contrary, but I do think it's also good. Like, you should never, once you, let's say, figure out what your personality type is, or let's say your spouse, your significant other, or your children, or your parents, you should never be afraid to go, you know what, I changed my mind. Because we're always figuring out new information about people, right? Even the people closest to us. Sometimes the people close to us are the hardest to type because we have so much information. So, and sometimes a lot of that information can be a bit distracting because we're like, well, they seem to like this, but they do this. And in situations like that, I'm always saying, like, it is important to figure out what people do, but figure out why they do it, because the reasons why they do it will determine their personality. And the same with us. Like, just the easiest way to figure out who you are is just figure out what you do, but more importantly, why do you do it? Why do you get a kick out of it? And then once you get that, then you'll figure out, and read the book.
There you go. So getting this book, right? Putting it, and I'm pointing to my head with the edge of the book, because reading it, you may have to read it more than once, right? To really fully grasp it. Are you able to start looking at people and going, that guy's an elephant. That's a butterfly. Or that's a shaman, or that's a gatherer. Or, wait a minute, that's a hunter, right? Are we able to do that once we tackle the book, we discern what people are? Or is there more work that we have to do? Do we have to say, hey, Eric, I just met this person. I got to call you on the phone. Let me tell you a little bit about them and what are they?
Well, you're free to contact me and ask, especially after you've bought a book. But
Right.
in general, I think, yeah, there's a little more work to be done. It's kind of like, the book is like a methodology to help you like have like the strategy of what you're going to do. It's kind of like reading a book on how to play basketball or something where it's like, okay, this is how I do a pick and roll. This is what
Right.
a give and go is. This is how the best way to learn how to dribble. But at the end of the day, you got to practice it, right? You got to like do it, and you do it over and over and over again. And the funny thing, the problem with asking me a question is I'm like, well, how does it feel? Because I think when you do something a lot, and definitely for this, as much as I've done it, it is a lot more about like feel, right? We're like, this person just feels like an elephant for sure. Yeah, they're an elephant. Like, and you're generally going to be right because I've done it for so long. But I think when you're just first starting, I think it's important to digest the ideas of the book and then go out and practice. And I always say use like pop culture as an example. Like watch a television show, watch a movie, work on those characters and think like, oh, what is Captain America? I mean, he might be really easy. I mean, a shield is his weapon. Come on. But like, like that's where you're like, okay, who is this
But it
person?
flies.
It does fly, but let's just face it, he is all about safety and security by his name, Captain America. I mean, you can't get more like gather than that. But yeah. So I would say like work on fictional characters first because they're not going to bite you back. And then once you get better at that and finally understanding like, oh, okay, I can see why Captain America might have an argument with Iron Man because they're different personality types and they value different things. But which is interesting because they both have the same objective, but the way that they go about getting that objective is going to be different based on your personality type. So neither are wrong. It just they are only wrong because they're so adamantly against each other, when it causes conflict, right? And I think once you learn how to do that with fictional characters, then you can start practicing on the people around you. Even though I do think, actually, I'll be honest, siblings and parents, if you have a sibling or if your parents are still alive, definitely do that first because I think those are the people that we really, truly want to understand because we're stuck with them for the rest of our lives anyway. So we might as well.
So you're saying that husband and wife should probably take a look at each other?
Yeah, I'm sure they know. I don't necessarily know why, if they know why they're arguing, but they definitely know that they're arguing and they've argued, right? And I think, yeah, once you start understanding about personality types, I think I'm not going to say it's going to stop the arguments, but I do think it might take out a little their bite because sometimes those, arguments, especially with your significant other, get personal, right? Like you feel like they're not understanding you or they're doing this to hurt you because they don't know you. When in fact, like they just don't know that you're different, right? And I think when you start understanding those things, it might help like lessen the conflict. It's not going to help prevent them because if you have different personalities, you're going to conflict. But if you know why you're conflicting, I think that'll help the relationship.
Oh, sure. And anybody listening, I did not mean to say just husbands and wives. It could be a partner, right? Somebody that you value and that you spend time with, right? So it could be a boyfriend, girlfriend, 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 boyfriend, boyfriend, whatever it is. But somebody that you spend quality time with. And if you're not spending quality time with, then maybe you need to find somebody else, right?
Right. I always like people always ask like, what's the perfect pairing? I'm like, there's no such thing as perfect pairing. I know theoretically there's like there are ideas like, okay, this will go well with this. And I do know those, but all I'm going to say is like, if you're with someone and you understand them, just don't try to change them. I think that's all. Like if you know what their personality type is, you know that you're going to conflict this way, you got to be okay with that. That's all. And then the relationship can work. But if you're not okay with that, then yeah, go find someone else.
What's wrong with this statement? I love you, now change.
I love everything about you. Yeah, now change all those things. Yeah. I was watching this show, I think The Diplomat, and that's exactly what happens in that, where they're longtime husband and wife. I think they kind of use Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton as an example, as a comp. But they're constantly arguing, and then finally one of the friends says like, "Why are you like so mad at him? Because you're only mad at him because you're mad at what he is, but then when he tries to change, you don't like him. You don't like those personality traits. So of course he's gonna like stick with what you like." So
absolutely. Take a look at this and then we'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Sifu Raphael. What if I told you 90 days is all it takes to detox your body, clear your mind, and completely reset your life? Sifu's Mind-Body Method is a complete system that blends movement, mindset, journaling, nutrition, hydration, and fasting into one powerful experience. This is your invitation to get stronger, clearer, and more in control from the inside out. Click the link and join Sifu's Mind Body Method today. Don't miss your chance to reset your life.
When we consider everything that you're talking about, and I asked you this earlier, can a shaman become a gatherer, or is that a trait that is in them anyways?
I would well, that's a dangerous one, because if a shaman has parents who are gatherers, those gatherers will definitely tell them that they can become a gatherer. So that's why I'm always like afraid of saying those things where people can change, because I feel like, especially for those types that there's only maybe like some animal personality types, there's maybe only 2% in the population. I wouldn't want them thinking, oh, they have to change, because of course, when they look around them, they're probably seeing that most people are different than they are. Right. So I don't want them, especially a shaman, is going to feel compelled to be like, oh gosh, like I'm such a weirdo. Like I need to like be more like other people, you know? But I think when we discover more about ourselves, I think that's the most important part, where we start realizing, oh, I am not changing. I'm just learning. I'm just having a greater sense of who I am. And that is going to make my life better.
Mm. One of the things, Eric, that I've spoken to so many authors, and if you had to rewrite your book, what would you change?
That's a good question. I'd probably look over some of my jokes in there, because maybe some of them are not as appropriate. No, I mean, I probably would. I would probably take some more time to figure out more stories, because I love stories, and I think people in general like hearing stories. So the more stories that I could add to it, probably the better. I think sometimes, especially when you're dealing with a topic that's a bit wonky, and it can get really nerdy sometimes when you get into the nitty gritty of it. Like sometimes a theory can get a little either over someone's head, or just boring, or just not connecting. And I do think more stories, just think of more stories to throw in there, more current stories. That's probably what I would do.
I love how you were able to so quickly talk to us about all these different celebrities and who you believe that they are. Um, has anyone asked you, um, can you help me figure somebody out?
Oh, yeah, I get that question quite a bit. When it's generally about relationships, and someone says, "Okay, so what's my partner? Are we good together?" Like that's a really common one, and I'm always just like, "Wait, so you're asking for a reason to not get along?" Like that seems like, and generally, my figuring out what someone is obviously starts with a lot of questions. So yeah, I get that question quite a bit. The first question I actually always ask is, what do they do? What is the person you're trying to figure out? What do they do for a living? And it doesn't mean, I know a lot of people are like, oh, well, that doesn't mean what someone is. Like if they're a lawyer, there's lots of different types of lawyers. I'm like, yeah, I know it doesn't, but it leads to questions, right? It's going to lead me into because the next obvious question is, do they like it? If someone doesn't like what they do for a living, then it does tell you more about them than maybe like it would you expect, because you'd be like, oh, okay, well, clearly, let's say, like I had a cousin's kid who said, oh, I got out of pharmacy school. I'm a pharmacist, but I don't want to do the same thing and be in the same place, my whole life. And I was like, well, clearly you chose the wrong profession, but there are things that you can do within that profession that might help. So
Interesting. What I'm going to suggest to everybody is for everybody to pick up not only the book, but here's the best way to pick up the book. Click on the QR code, pick up your book, get engaged with the book. Understand that every time that you speak to somebody, there's more to them, right? And you're telling us that there's more to them based on who they are, based on the animal that they are, based on their personality type, right? Maybe they're a gatherer, maybe they're a hunter or a shaman or a smith. And And you talked about a smith can be nowadays, they may not be using a hammer and a chisel, yet there are many people who do that still, but they may be using different tools with technology, right? They may be could a programmer be a smith?
Yeah, they're the most common smiths actually, software engineers,
Mhm.
because smiths, funny enough, smiths are not known as tool users, they're known as tool builders.
Mm.
So they would be like Q in James Bond, right? Q's building all the tools,
Right,
and then James Bond is the user, which he would be the hunter, right? So
right.
with software engineer, same thing. They're building the tools that we use to make life better.
Nice, nice. Everybody, listen, great book, great guy. Um, I got to meet him. Eric, people are going to buy the book. They're going to click on the code, and you share it when they click on the code, different places they can actually buy the book. So it's not a one stop. Oh my gosh, I got to buy it here. You have a lot of places that you can choose to buy the book, and that's what the book looks like. And if you're looking at it the sideways, because maybe it's somewhere, it still has exactly what you need to look for. Um, what made you come up with that title? And then we're going to wind up wrapping it up because I just love the idea of the power of personality.
Okay, I'm not gonna lie, my publisher came up with that title.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, but I like it, and the publisher gives you like three options. Now they did ask me, how about like what ideas do you have for a title? And of course, I threw in like a bunch of ideas. I do think that authors, and maybe it's just me, maybe have like more abstract,
Right.
ideas, and they think that it's gonna really like oh, people are gonna get it, like this concept. And so I probably threw out ideas that were a little bit more conceptual. Whereas publishers are like, no, let's just get to the nitty gritty. It's the power of someone's personality. I'm like, yeah, let's do that. So
Great choice. And I also like the cover because it shows people connecting, right? And it shows their shadows because you may be holding somebody's hand, but there's more to just holding that hand. There's a deeper connection that we can get into. And when we get to understand who they are, I mean, woof, I just say wolf, I say woof. Uh, can't come from that because I think we're such complex beings that I think to try to understand every little concept about us is kind of cool, but yet should we leave some mystery out there?
yeah, I think mystery is great. I think there's always going to be mystery, right? I think there's
Mm,
all there's never you should never read the book and go like, okay, then I know every single thing about this
right.
person that I have now typed. No, you're not gonna know because they're constantly going to be doing things that surprise you. Like we can do things that are totally different than our personality type. Now, do we want to keep doing those things and make that consistent? Probably not, because it's going to make us feel really terrible eventually. But that's the fun, is going out of the box and doing things that are not necessarily natural for a
Mhm.
personality. We can do that. I always tell people, find your anchor first, though, because you need to find your anchor so that when you try out different things, you don't become different things, because that's when it becomes dangerous.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. Eric, my friend, thank you so much for being on Author's Tales. Um,
Thank you so much for having me.
yeah, absolutely. Are you looking to follow up with that book, or are you looking at different ideas when it comes to your writing?
Yeah, I think the follow-up book would be something based on personality types, like with romance. Sorry, of course it would
Oh,
be
look
about
at that.
personality types. But yeah, it would basically be about coupling, and it's like if you're this type and you're with this type, then this is how you get along, and this is how you won't.
Uh,
And these are the reasons why. Right.
that
Like
makes sense.
once again, I'm not a big fan of like saying this is your soulmate and all that, but I probably will mention that these are theoretically these two are a good match because of those reasons, but you're still not going to get along in certain instances because we're different, right? You're not going to get along with people who are exactly the same as you either. If you're with two shamans, you're going to keep getting into each other's like psychic space, right? So
Mhm. Yeah, beautiful. Do me a favor, hang out. Everybody, go get the book one more time. Here's the QR code. I'm going to add that right there. So click on it, Go get the book. It's a great read. And this is what the book looks like. And Eric, always a great conversation. I know you were on my other shows, and I know you're probably coming on some more. I love the energy that you bring, and just keep being amazing, my friend.
Thank you so much.
All right. You hang on. Everybody, have a great rest of your day, and we will see you next time. Thank you for watching Author's Tales. Stay updated and meet new authors. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at Sifu Raphael TV. Follow us on Facebook and LinkedIn, and visit our website. Your support means the world to us.